I'm Danielle Capelli. A 12-day manhunt in Quebec appears to be over. Provincial police say they believe they have found the body of Martin Carpentier. He was wanted in connection with the deaths of his two young daughters. Matt Damour reports.
Provincial police received a citizen's tip which led them to a spot in the Saint-Apollinaire area about 30 kilometers south of Quebec City. A body was found there, and although it's unconfirmed, the Sûreté du Québec believes it is 44-year-old Martin Carpentier. Initial findings point to a death by suicide. Nadia Chabot lives close to where the body was found.
Vraiment soulagée. Oui.
She says she's relieved Carpentier was found, that it will take some pressure off. The 44-year-old went missing with his daughters, 6-year-old Rami and 11-year-old Nora, on July 8th, triggering an Amber Alert. The girls' bodies were found 3 days later in a wooded area near Saint-Apollinaire. Their funeral was held yesterday. Provincial police had no further comment, but said they'd provide an update in the coming days. Matt Damour, CBC News, Montreal.
The RCMP say they have not yet determined what caused a tour bus to crash near Jasper, Alberta last weekend, but a rock slide has not been ruled out. The bus left the roadway and rolled down an embankment, killing 3 people. Another 24 were hospitalized, 4 remain in critical condition. A helicopter crash in Newfoundland has claimed the life of 1 person and left 2 others injured. An RCMP official says the civilian helicopter went down about 200 kilometers northwest of St. John's. No word yet on the cause of the crash. Retail sales jumped by 18.7% in May after plummeting 24% in April. But overall, sales are still down, 20% lower than in February, pre-pandemic lockdowns. As Peter Armstrong tells us, consumer spending will be key to any economic recovery.
It's hard to overstate the importance of retail sales, from groceries to books to cars, where every dollar spent is someone else's income. So when consumer spending dries up, that ripples through every other aspect of the economy. The complication here is that this isn't just an economic crisis, it remains a health crisis. Now, though, Dan Kelly from the Canadian Federation of Independent Business says what's needed is a change in consumer behaviors. For a while, online shopping or big box stores were the only option. As that changes, he's urging Canadians to flock back to their local shops.
Changing your shopping patterns and ensuring that you're patronizing those local independents that were hardest hit.
Even then, he says most of his members expect it'll take 6 months or more before they're back to turning a profit. Peter Armstrong, CBC News, Toronto.
Closing arguments are expected to continue today at the manslaughter trial of Ottawa Police Constable Daniel Monsian. A confrontation between Monsian and 37-year-old Abdirahman Abdi ended with Abdi fatally injured. Monsian is charged with manslaughter, aggravated assault, and assault with a weapon. Health officials are warning young Canadians to avoid parties, bars, and socializing. In the second week of July, Canadians in their 20s accounted for a quarter of all new coronavirus cases. Dr. Lenora Saxinger is an infectious disease specialist in Edmonton.
And I think the bigger thing to think about, which is hard to keep in mind, honestly, is that if you do spread infection, if you have like such a minor infection that you don't even feel unwell, but you spread it to someone else and they die, that is actually a devastating thing, to be responsible for that.
Authorities are urging young people to stick to one social circle. South of the border, U.S. President Donald Trump will be back in front of the cameras today, taking part in the resurrected White House COVID-19 updates. Trump advisors have pressured him to adopt a more disciplined public message in an effort to turn around his sagging poll numbers against Democratic rival Joe Biden. In another sign of the recalibration, Trump belatedly tweeted a photo of himself wearing a face mask, calling wearing one an act of patriotism. And that is your World This Hour from CBC News.
From CTV News at 7:09 a.m. today. Hello, I'm Nicole Dubé from the CTV Newsroom in Winnipeg. Here are the top stories. Quebec police believe they've found the body of Martin Carpentier, the subject of a massive manhunt in connection with the murder of his two daughters. The 44-year-old's body was discovered in the same area near Quebec City, where police called off their ground search on the weekend. Carpentier's remains were found just hours after the funeral for the two little girls on Monday. The co-founders of the We charity will appear before the House of Commons Finance Committee to discuss the $900 million contract at the center of a conflict of interest scandal. The Liberals are under fire for Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and Bill Morneau's family ties to the organization. The Conservatives are pushing for a criminal investigation. The federal government wants to extend the COVID-19 wage subsidy into possibly December. Gone is the requirement that employers have to lose 30% of their revenues to qualify. Now they'll qualify if they've lost any revenue and will be compensated proportionally. MPs will finish debating the bill today, and it's expected to pass. Scientists at Oxford University are reporting a promising development in their experimental coronavirus vaccine. It's been shown in early trials to prompt a protective immune response in hundreds of people who were tested. The vaccine causes a reaction in the body's T cells, which help to fight off the virus. If further testing is successful, the vaccine could be available sometime next year. For all the day's top stories and breaking news as it happens, tune to CTV News Channel or go online to ctvnews.ca. I'm Nicole Dubé.
From CNBC Tech Check at 3:43 p.m. yesterday.
I'm Josh Lipton with your CNBC Tech Check. Walt Disney has reportedly slashed its advertising spending on Facebook ads. That's according to the Wall Street Journal. Disney was Facebook's biggest U.S. advertiser in the first half of this year, spending an estimated $210 million just on ads for its streaming service, Disney+. Facebook is facing a wider ad boycott over its policing of hate speech on its platforms. Disney has not made it clear whether it is joining the boycott or how long it will be pulling back on ad spending. Sticking with advertising, eBay is in advanced talks to sell its classified ads business to Norway's Adevinta for around $8 billion. That's also according to the Wall Street Journal, which says a deal could be announced as soon as today. The eBay unit is similar to Craigslist and operates primarily in Canada, parts of Europe, Africa, Australia, and Mexico. In recent years, eBay has tried to refocus on its core marketplace business, selling its StubHub ticketing division last fall. And TikTok is still considering putting its global headquarters in London. A source tells CNBC that the social media giant has not halted talks with the British government amid rising tensions between the UK and China. Reports over the weekend suggested that TikTok had shelved plans to set up the HQ in Britain, a move that could create as many as 3,000 jobs. That's the news from the West Coast. We'll see you back here tomorrow.
From DW Newsbrief at 7 a.m. today.
This is DW News, and these are our top stories. EU leaders have struck a deal on an historic multi-billion euro coronavirus recovery package. After 4 days of wrangling, leaders reached an agreement to distribute 750 billion euros in aid. More than half will be non-repayable grants in a compromise struck after opposition from northern European countries. In Germany, the trial has begun of the man accused of an attack on a synagogue in the eastern city of Halle last October. Prosecutors say he intended to massacre the worshippers inside. He is also accused of murdering 2 people nearby. A German national has been kidnapped by unidentified gunmen in the Iraqi capital Baghdad. The abducted woman is Hella Mewis, who works for a German cultural institute and is also known as an activist. Friends said she had feared for her safety. Sudan's former President Omar al-Bashir is facing court today over charges relating to his 1989 military coup. He could face the death penalty if convicted. Al-Bashir is already behind bars for corruption. This is DW News from Berlin. Follow us on Twitter and Instagram at DW News or visit our website, dw.com.
From Bloomberg First Word at 5:54 a.m. today.
European Union leaders have agreed on a landmark $860 billion plan to rescue economies hit hard by the coronavirus. It's built around a first for the bloc, hundreds of billions of dollars of common debt. The emergency fund is almost equally split between grants and low-interest loans. Italy is likely to be the biggest beneficiary. It was the original European epicenter of the pandemic. The Trump administration has now come out and endorsed mask wearing. President Trump has long resisted covering his face in public, but he tweeted that, quote, "It is patriotic to wear a face mask when you can't socially distance." Polls showed that the president's refusal to endorse masks was out of step with citizens terrified by the coronavirus resurgence. The richest person in the world just got a whole lot richer. Amazon CEO Jeff Bezos added $13 billion to his fortune yesterday. It's the largest single-day jump for an individual since the Bloomberg Billionaires Index was created in 2012. Give the credit to Amazon, whose shares rose almost 8%. Bezos' fortune is now worth more than $189 billion. Global News, 24 hours a day on air and at Bloomberg Quick Take, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Ritika Gupta. This is Bloomberg.
Let's put on some podcast.
Has this new waste-free dental floss at Equip.Tel.
Pitchfork's editor.
Experience it all. Federal agent. A few weeks ago, the Black Lives Matter protests were basically anywhere you looked in the United States. But in Portland, Oregon, they never really stopped. And then something happened there that a lot of other cities didn't experience at all. Federal agents in full camo fatigues showed up and started throwing people in unmarked minivans. Oregon Public Broadcasting has been covering this story. I spoke with OPB's Conrad Wilson this morning.
For weeks, the Portland Police Bureau has been policing these protests, and they were policing them really aggressively. But the federal government started to get involved really around the 4th of July.
This event has been declared a riot. Disperse immediately. If you do not disperse to the east, you are subject to arrest or use of force to include crowd control munitions.
We saw a pretty big night where basically federal law enforcement came out of the courthouse and really cleared protesters through the city. They went several blocks away from the federal courthouse. Their stated mission here, has been to protect federal property and personnel. We took note of the fact that here you have federal law enforcement that are, blocks into the city, blocks away from federal property. They claimed they were going from one federal property to another, but, our reporters on the ground were seeing other things. It was like they were using pretty aggressive crowd control tactics.
Who exactly are these federal law enforcement members? Where do they come from?
It's members of the U.S. Marshal Service. There's a special operations team with the U.S. Marshal Service that's come here. And it's also been heavily Department of Homeland Security personnel. There have been members of Customs and Border Protection. There's a group called BORTAC that does a lot of work on the border, pretty controversial group. There have been members of a special ICE unit, a special operations ICE unit that have been here protecting, they say, the federal courthouse. This all happened after President Trump signed an executive order in late June.
Now they're looking at Jesus Christ. They're looking at George Washington. They're looking at Abraham Lincoln, Thomas Jefferson. Not going to happen. Not going to happen. Not as long as I'm here.
Yeah, I don't think a lot of people took that very seriously, but there was a there, huh?
Yeah, well, I guess, there was. And there was a part of it that was clamping down on criminal activity. That's sort of what has put so many federal law enforcement officers in Portland. That's what's gotten so much attention here. The idea that Trump is sort of sending federal law enforcement here and that they're behaving how they're behaving, using tear gas, using crowd control devices. There was a really kind of seminal moment last weekend where a protester was hit in the head by a member of the U.S. Marshal Service.
Labella seems to be improving. He's no longer critical and is instead listed in serious condition today. But his mother told me it's still unclear how his injuries will impact his vision or if there's any brain trauma.
And I mean, these things have just angered people. It's, you know, and I think that the idea that the president, who continues to talk about Portland, who talks about quelling protests in Portland.
We've done a great job in Portland. Portland was totally out of control, and they went in, and I guess we have many people right now in jail, and we very much quelled it. And if it starts again, we'll quell it again very easily.
Yeah, people here are mad. They're just really mad. They want federal law enforcement to leave.
I think another seminal moment that perhaps led to a lot more people outside of Portland and Oregon noticing that this was happening was this video that circulated all over the world last week of a protester sort of being dragged into an unmarked vehicle by what looked like military personnel who refused to identify themselves. Is that a fair characterization?
Yeah.
What are you doing? Use your words. What are you doing? Use your words. What are you doing? Use your words. What is going on? Who are you? NLG will get you out. What's your name? Tell us your name. Okay, you're fine. We'll get you out. We got you, friend.
We got you.
I mean, that video was extraordinary, and actually we broke a story about this guy named Mark Pettibone. It wasn't him in that video, but something like that happened to him. Basically, he had attended a protest, and after the protest, he was leaving.
Van pulls up right in front of us, and I am basically tossed into the van, and I had my beanie pulled over my face, so I couldn't see.
He didn't know where he was going, but it was the federal courthouse.
They patted me down and took my picture and rummaged through my belongings. One of them said, this is a whole lot of nothing. You know, he seemed disappointed that I didn't have any weapons or anything on me.
Eventually, he was given his Miranda rights, read his Miranda rights. He was asked if he wanted to waive his rights and answer some questions, and he said he didn't. And, you know, the federal law enforcement officers said, hey, this interview's over. They left him there for about another hour and a half before he was released. And when we arrest somebody in this country, we have to have probable cause. And there's a lot of questions about, did that happen here? I mean, was this an event where there was probable cause? And it really disturbs so many people.
I think what seems particularly haunting to people is that this doesn't look like something that requires federal law enforcement or military personnel. This looks like a local thing that local law enforcement, especially as militarized as they are these days, could handle.
So Ken Cuccinelli, he's the acting deputy secretary at the Department of Homeland Security. He told NPR last week that
I fully expect that as long as people continue to be violent and to destroy property, that we will attempt to identify those folks. We will pick them up in front of the courthouse. If we spot them elsewhere, we will pick them up elsewhere.
This doesn't look like America. This looks like another country. And when I talk to like federal law enforcement officials, you know, they say things like, I don't know why they have to wear camouflage. You know, I don't know why they're using unmarked vehicles. Like, there's a way you can look like a military force that's trying to intimidate people, and there's a way you can look like law enforcement that is trying to investigate, you know, a possible crime. And very much so, folks here feel like it is this kind of occupying force, this sort of militarized force that is trying to intimidate.
How are people and the protesters in Portland responding to this federal presence in their city now that there are these videos of these strange sort of abductions that are occurring?
They're really mad. I think people that, you know, may have been open to the idea of having federal law enforcement protect federal buildings are increasingly, I think, radicalized against the role the federal government is playing here, and they're increasingly angry. Portland Mayor Ted Wheeler has had an evolution on this. You know, he initially, you know, was supportive of federal law enforcement protecting their building. He didn't say, you know, he said, I don't have an issue with that. The thing he said that made him angry, though, was them kind of coming out of their building and starting to police the streets of Portland.
The videos, the pictures,
The experiences that we're all witnessing here in Portland should be shocking to all Americans. The words and actions from President Trump and the Department of Homeland Security have shown that this is an attack on our democracy.
And I think, even folks that saw a role for the federal government to play here are now saying, why are they here? A Multnomah County Commissioner named Sharon Myron, she's an ER doctor. She's just a kind of this warm, affable person. She got tear gassed.
It does feel like this occupying force has come in that is, in any other world, in any other scenario, you'd be watching this on TV and thinking this is like a dictatorship and they're coming in and taking over.
It changes the way people think about the role law enforcement is playing here, and it makes you wonder, what are they really doing here? Is it about protecting buildings? It increasingly starts to look like an occupation.
And now it feels like these protests in Portland aren't about George Floyd anymore. It actually seems like they're about the response to the protests that were about George Floyd.
I say this with a lot of humility, but I mean the story we wrote about the vans, basically federal officers picking people up, completely blew up. And prior to that, it was sort of a smaller group of people that had been turning out to these protests. But that story comes out, and the response was really huge. I mean, there were a lot more people that were out protesting. Even moms that were showing up and kind of dancing and, basically organizing, downtown. Shooting a firework at a federal building, or hitting a law enforcement officer with a hammer, which have happened, very much so, that's going to be seen as criminal activity. But when you have moms out there dancing in the street, I mean, I think it really humanizes sort of a protest movement. And in a way, it's like almost giving it a new identity and really kind of creating a sense of this is what this is about, Portland. And federal government, what are you doing here? Explain yourself.
After the break, Oregon sues the federal government. I'm Sean Rameswaram. It's Today Explained. But with powerful search engine to your website so you can deliver processing yellow
artists with the pitchfork floor the best of all, wherever you get your podcast.
Protect federal property within the city. How has that thinking evolved over time? I mean, are there still people in elected positions in the city or the state who are saying we need these federal law enforcement members here protecting stuff, or is this pretty much uniformly get these people out at this point?
We should be careful how we talk about the mayor and his views towards federal law enforcement. What he saw was just you have a federal building here, you should use your resources to protect that building, just like, we're using local police to protect, our buildings. But at this point, I think everybody is wanting the federal government to really de-escalate the situation. They want kind of this enhanced federal law enforcement presence to go.
How is the city or the state making that desire known or making it official?
So the Oregon Department of Justice filed a lawsuit late Friday night. The lawsuit is claiming that there have been civil rights violations pertaining to people being picked up. I mean, this idea that the unmarked vehicles are coming and grabbing protesters, and that the Department of Homeland Security says this activity will continue. They laid that out in a lawsuit. And they're also pursuing with kind of state prosecutors. They're pursuing a criminal investigation into the Donathan Labella incident, the guy who was hit in the head with the crowd control device by a U.S. Marshal. They're looking to see if there is a criminal case to be brought against federal law enforcement there. So those are two pretty huge things that the state did late Friday night.
And what exactly are they suing over in this lawsuit?
So, yeah, the Oregon Department of Justice's lawsuit against the federal government alleges that the federal government's actions have violated Portlanders' free speech, their due process rights, and also resulted in unlawful seizures. And they say that they're creating a public nuisance. In a pretty powerful statement, Oregon Attorney General Ellen Rosenblum said that the tactics must stop. They not only make it impossible for people to assert their First Amendment rights to protest peacefully, but she says that the federal government's creating a more volatile situation on the streets of Portland.
Is this the only lawsuit over this sort of federal law enforcement presence in Portland?
So the ACLU has also filed a lawsuit, the ACLU of Oregon, with the idea of trying to protect journalists and legal observers from basically being, tear gassed during the protests. A federal judge basically said that the ACLU can expand in its lawsuit the Department of Homeland Security, other parts of the federal government. And so it's a separate lawsuit, but it was filed to sort of protect legal observers, folks out there that are trying to document what's happening, and that also includes journalists. And there's a lot of journalists on the ground, and a lot of them are freelance journalists that are kind of out there filming the incidents every night and providing just another way of documenting what's happening.
I think when a lot of people watch these videos, their first reaction is like, who are these federal law enforcement officers? And the second reaction is, can they even do that? Is this legal? Do we know, or is this lawsuit going to resolve that question?
Absolutely. I mean, the President of the United States and the Department of Homeland Security, they have a lot of power. I mean, it's the federal government. But the question is what's happening here actually legal? I tend to think that the Oregon Department of Justice, Ellen Rosenblum, they're doing more than just making a statement by filing the lawsuit saying the federal government wants to leave. I mean, they think that there are legal grounds here where the federal government, the Trump administration, the Department of Homeland Security have overstepped. And so that's what this lawsuit is, going to answer for us in a way.
I know this is all happening pretty quickly, and we're talking, noon Monday. Has the federal government or even President Trump responded in any way at this point? Do you know?
So yesterday, Trump responded on Twitter like he does. And he said, we're trying to help Portland not hurt it. The leadership has for months lost control of the anarchists and the agitators. He said that we must protect federal property and our people. These are, not merely protesters. These are, quote, the real deal, whatever that means.
It just feels like there must have been a better way here, a better way to protect buildings, protect, a federal courthouse, while also facilitating peaceful protests.
I think it's reasonable to think that the federal government is going to, just like any government, is going to protect buildings. I mean, those are funded by taxpayers. I think that the actions on the 4th of July were an escalation on the part of the federal government. Shooting a protester in the head with a crowd control device, that really escalated the situation. Picking people up in unmarked vehicles wearing military fatigues, that escalates the situation. And so I think that there's probably a better way to go about it than some of the things the federal government has done up until now.
Conrad Wilson is a reporter covering legal affairs and criminal justice at Oregon Public Broadcasting. You can find and support his work at opb.org. We lost a great American over the weekend. Congressman John Lewis died of pancreatic cancer at 80 years of age. We thought about making an episode about his extraordinary life and leadership in the civil rights movement here in the United States, but ultimately decided this was the episode he would have wanted us to make today.
I got arrested a few times during the 60s. 40 times. And since I've been in Congress, another 5 times. And I'm probably going to get arrested again for something. But my philosophy is very simple. When you see something that is not right, not fair, not just, say something, do something, get in trouble, good trouble, necessary trouble.
Okay, that was it. I'll be right back.
You could make yourself happier every day in
Hey
every
guys.
aspect.
So today Explained is over, but we're going to be listening to Stuff You Should Know, and this episode is how we almost got rid of polio.
Changes the neurons of your brain, and why saying thanks helps CEOs succeed. Discover how gratitude.
Really interesting things, and you can pre-order it now.
That's right, and if you are, that
works.
Before we get going, though, we want to tell everyone that we have a book coming out called Stuff You Should Know. What a big deal. And why? Because you get a special gift. That's right. And we get great illustrations by Carly Minardo. We had a great... now let's talk.
It would say things like, does polio still exist? And it absolutely does. But it's one of those diseases that we're really, really close to eradicating, thanks to an extraordinarily robust vaccination campaign. One of the first really big vaccination campaigns in the history of the world. And it was also one of the most successful, too. So much so that we're down to just 3 countries. I believe Pakistan, Afghanistan, and Nigeria are the only 3 countries where polio is still endemic, where like you can just walk around and catch polio. And there are outbreaks in other countries. We'll talk about exactly why. But it went from this global, worldwide problem at the beginning of the 20th century down to 3 countries, and we're like that close to getting rid of it forever from the planet, basically.
Yeah, so, and it's interesting to read about polio and its vaccine during the middle of our own pandemic with coronavirus and COVID-19, because there's a lot of similarities and overlap. It's interesting.
There's a pandemic on?
Yeah, that's why I haven't seen you in 3 months.
I know. Are you getting used to it yet?
I mean, sure, just as anyone gets used to something that stinks.
Oh, thank you.
I didn't mean not seeing you. I mean everything, but sure, that's a part of that.
Gotcha.
It's for sure a part of that.
But it is weird talking about it for sure, because there are some real similarities for sure.
Yeah, so polio is the disease, but poliovirus is the enterovirus, which is a virus of the intestinal tract, which is an RNA virus like COVID-19. But the disease itself, like COVID, is the sickness. Polio is the disease, as coronavirus is the polio virus. I mixed that all up, but I think it's right.
So coronavirus is to COVID what poliovirus is to polio.
Yeah, that's the cleaner way to say it.
Right, and then apparently polio specifically, if you say, oh, this person, my grandfather had polio, you're not talking about just a polio infection. There's a specific kind of disease that you can get from the polio virus where it attacks your central nervous system and can cause all sorts of problems. And that specifically is what somebody's saying when they say they had polio, which is in that case called poliomyelitis, which is what people are talking about when they're talking about polio, the disease.
Yeah, because a lot of people got the polio virus. Didn't know it, had no symptoms. Your body kicks into gear. That immune system just fights it off. You got those antibodies for life, and that's it. That happened a lot. But yeah, like you said, if you get polio, that means that it hits your central nervous system. And we'll get more into detail about all this. But polio virus is where it colonizes is in the throat and the digestive system.
Right.
And we're talking about your feces being contaminated or infectious and contaminated, and your saliva, depending on how you get it.
So there's basically 2 ways to pass it along, either with your poop or with your saliva. And the fecal transmission is much more prevalent, especially in the developing world, because of poor sanitation. Yeah. And like if you look at just the natural history of the virus, of the polio virus, its ideal is to just replicate, right? That's the whole purpose of a virus, is just make as many copies of itself as possible. And so living in the water, the drinking water supply, and then infecting people, infecting their gut, replicating, being passed as feces back into the water supply to infect other people, but without, really developing symptoms in people, that's ideal for the virus itself. Every once in a while, though, I think in about 1/4 of people who become infected, the polio virus will enter the bloodstream. It'll leave the gut and enter the bloodstream and will produce what's called viremia, where it infects the blood, it starts to infect other organs, and those people will develop flu-like symptoms for a couple of days. That's still not that bad, probably nothing we would have mounted a global eradication campaign against. It's just that in a very small proportion of people who become infected, the polio virus not only infects the bloodstream, it actually travels to the central nervous system and attacks that. And then that is the real problem that comes from polio, what we were talking about earlier, poliomyelitis.
Yeah, and no one knows why that happens. No one knows. I mean, basically, they just think it is completely random. I mean, that seems to be the case of whether or not you get the paralytic version or not. It is not many people, but when you spread those numbers out, it can be a lot of people. So when you look at numbers like 0.5% of everyone infected have paralysis, if you look at a human population, that's a lot of people.
Right. Just that very small percent of everybody or a ton of people around the world and for centuries have, an infection, it does add up big time for sure. Enough so, and so not just the number also, Chuck, but just the devastating effects that polio can have, poliomyelitis can have on a person. It's a really bad jam because not only can it cause what's called acute flaccid paralysis, where your motor neurons or your muscles are attacked so that you can't use your muscle and your limb starts to wither, or maybe you just become fully paralyzed. It can also travel to your brain and affect things like your swallowing reflex or breathing. And so it can very, very easily kill you when it starts to progress to the central nervous system phase of poliomyelitis.
Yeah, and there's no treatment for polio, and we'll talk about the vaccine here in a minute to a great extent. But it's just like any other virus. You let it run its course. Your body will probably do the right thing and step up and fight it back, and not let it get to your bloodstream. But like you said, even if it gets to your bloodstream, you might just get sick.
Right.
But that 0.5% chance that you actually have the paralytic version, there is no cure for that.
No, which is weird. I was like, so what? You're just a goner if you get poliomyelitis, or that's what the case was. And apparently your body can still fight it off. You can get poliomyelitis, and if you receive the proper care, one of the better inventions to combat polio is called the iron lung, which would breathe for you using a bellows and negative and positive pressure to move your chest up and down. Like that could keep you alive long enough to give you a chance for your body to fight off the infection with your immune system. But like, that's not a cure. That's just keeping you alive long enough for your body to fight it off. It was really surprising to me that there's still to this day no treatment for polio.
Yeah, I can't help but think of the Big Lebowski when I think of iron lungs.
Who is in an iron lung in that?
Remember when they go to visit they think the kid stole the car? Or they found it. They found the kid's schoolwork in the back of the car, and they go to his house, and it was this former TV writer who's inside, and he's in an iron lung. I
genuinely don't remember that part. I'm sure I'm being shouted at by some of our listeners, but sorry.
Okay. It was played for laughs.
The one I think of is Ralph Macchio in The Outsiders after he gets burned from running in that house to save those people.
Was he in an iron lung?
That's what I thought, and so I looked it up to verify, and there's no mention of it. So I guess when I was a kid, I just made up that Ralph Macchio is in an iron lung in The Outsiders.
If I'm not mistaken, he was just had I guess what you would call a respirator today.
Okay, but wasn't
maybe
he
they were called respirators
down?
back then? Yeah, I think he was face down in traction and suspended and on a respirator. If I'm not mistaken.
Well, my tiny little impressionable brain translated that into an iron lung.
Well, that's okay. Stay gold.
My brain hasn't gotten much better, Chuck.
Sure it has.
So, So you can survive, you can fend off a polio infection, even with poliomyelitis. But the problem is that it very frequently would not let you survive. It would kill you. And so, like we said, just mounting this campaign became kind of paramount. But polio is tough because they think it's such an old virus. They think it's been around for a very, very long time. And that's kind of evidenced by the fact that polio is, it's only humans that it lives in and tries to replicate in. It's not like other viruses where there's like reservoir animals that it can hang out in and just basically stay alive until it can infect a human. It's just humans, basically. Although there was a case in 1966 of some chimps becoming infected from humans with polio. Isn't that something?
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Wow. And if you need to go over viruses again, folks, look no further than the recent Stuff You Should Know Classic from March 20th, Virus Talk with Josh and Chuck.
That was from March 20th?
The re-release. What do we call those classics?
Oh, gotcha. Selects.
Selects.
Aren't you like one half of this podcast?
I am, but I call them classics in my brain. I don't know what the official branding is.
Selects.
Yeah.
Like we have hand-selected this classic episode.
Yeah, classics.
I think if you scramble the word selects, classics is in there somewhere. But it's misspelled.
So. But yeah, that one just came out recently, so that'll catch up on what a virus is. But should we take a break and talk a little bit about the ancient history, perhaps, of polio?
Yes.
All right, we'll be right back, everybody.
Want to learn about a pterosaur and call it pterodactyl? How to take a perfect poop and all about fractals. Genghis Khan, Attila the Hun, the Lizzie Borden murders and the cannibal runs. Don't explain everything to your brain explodes. It's Chuck and Josh. That's stuff you should know. Word up, Jerry.
Hi, I'm Devin Leary.
And I'm Carolina Barlow.
And we're here to tell you to dump him.
Break up with your boyfriend.
And we want you to listen to our podcast, True Romance, every week, where we talk about our love lives and the love lives of others.
Please join our exes, who we know will also...
We did it, guys. We listened to news, did our yoga, podcast, and we did it all while high. All we need now is an affirmation. To visit with my client today on Facebook Messenger, or not to, and also memorize my pitch. Noodle, don't noodle. You're too worried about what once was and not what will be. However, there's a saying, yesterday's history, tomorrow's a mystery, but today is a gift. That's why they call it the present. Guys, thank you so much for joining. So many of you came through. Guy, OJ, Brian. Pretty sure I saw Dimitri up there. Thank you so much. Richard, Lowe, and gosh, I thought I'd remember. Beatrice. Yeah, no, I didn't remember. Anyhow, I hope you guys have a great day, and I will see you the next time I see you.